The late season rookie running back surge for fantasy production of this 2020 class. We've got count them, six running backs over the past month that are rookies in the top 15 in points per game. This is right where you want to be, which is they could be unstartable. It could be a bumpy road to get there. But here we are last week, this week, and next week. You're starting them in plenty of Dynasty lineups. Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And Jordan, here we sit. And I think Cam Akers would be maybe a poster child for this, of saying, man, how did we get here? A lot of recalculating, turn left. Or it's like the Michael Scott, it's telling me to drive into the lake. I think that was like week 6 or whatever for Cam Akers. He's missing games. I think he had a stretch of about 4-6 weeks where he didn't see 10 plus touches. Yet here we are. He's seen 50, 60 touches over 2 weeks. And I think you feel really good about starting him this coming week and probably foreseeable future. But man, windy back roads. And it would say, well, you could get there in 20 minutes, but we're going to go the quote unquote scenic route and get there in an hour and a half. And that's what we've done with Cam Akers as just one example here of expecting week 1 or September production. I think we were talking about this in July and August and rookie draft time. That is not what the business of drafting rookies is about. It's about putting them on your bench. And if you get some predictable starts out of them in year 1, all the better, but you can't go into it saying that's my goal.
Yeah, you can't. And really the trend, and this is backed up by some recent examples, but the trend that I've really found historically has been you can expect about a half a season worth of comfortable starts from a round 2 rookie running back, right? And that's good, right? And I don't think, and this is I saw this on Twitter circulating a little bit, and a couple mutual friends of ours were discussing it. But one of the things was that, the person was basically saying, don't, I got all of the situational guesses that I had in May wrong, right? And
shocker.
That's right.
Situation's hard to predict. I never would have guessed.
Right. It would, who would have known? So when you sort of, when you look back, and a lot of these things, like we thought that, we thought maybe the Akers had a better shot than Swift, and you know what I mean? Like nothing really went to plan, and then Marlon Mack got hurt, right? So all these things, like it's really tough to predict them. But I think the general rule of thumb is you expect about a half a season worth of comfortable starts from them, and then they really arc into year 2 as being basically workhorse running backs. That's typically the career arc of, as a general rule of thumb, that's the success for a second round rookie running back. And so what's funny is you get all this hand wringing from basically, from September through Thanksgiving about it, right? And that's, maybe Thanksgiving was a little bit late for Cam Akers to start coming on, right? It's probably a little bit behind what that arc would have been. But I think when you have a reasonable expectation for what the arc should look like, it'll make your decisions a lot easier. We were discussing some different valuation changes on different players, and some of these things is you see people moving players up and down, and it just doesn't seem like there's any basis in reality for it. I mean, seriously, if in August I had told you, hey, listen, we're going to sit here in the lead up to week 15, and on a seasonal points basis, Jonathan Taylor is going to rank as running back 12. How's he doing in his rookie season? Like, you would absolutely take that, right? Like, you would absolutely take that. And yet there's all this narrative that's gone on around it, that he can't, put Jordan Wilkins aside, or all that he can't catch, which is basically the most exposing opinion that you can have in terms of actually paying attention to stuff about Jonathan Taylor. But all that stuff, even Edwards-Helaire, right? Like, we could sort of, he's a classic example of a player that I think if you didn't have the right expectations, you're paying through the nose. But when you sort of step back and say, hey, would you take, for this rookie running back, would you take a top 15 seasonal score right now? Like, that's a historic success, right? It's just a matter of what the cost was. So I think the expectations were a little bit out of whack. And if you sort of had patience, which is the most contrarian of all dynasty strategies, is having actual patience.
The actual long view.
Yeah. Instead of it being playing DFS on it and, all their values moving and all that other stuff, right? If you just sort of, if I let you sleep through August through yesterday and you woke up today and you saw it, you'd be like, oh, like, all right, like Taylor's having a pretty good season. Like Edwards-Helaire's having a pretty good, this is probably above what you would expect from a first round rookie. And you sort of look at it and everyone's, shocked by these things. I don't know. It's an interesting, it's the shaping of expectations for me is something I've learned each year. I think when you have the right priced and right framed expectations, I think that's a really valuable part of Dynasty.
Yeah, and I was just thinking of a non-rookie. You talk about, if you just had a couple of data points or a couple of information points without having all of them, that your framing would be completely different. Like, what if I told you that there'd be a big cross section of this season where Damian Harris is the unquestioned Patriots lead running back? You'd be like, yes, finally, he's been unleashed. And I was like, but what if I told you he's unstartable? Like, what? but what if I also told you he's actually looked pretty good? You're like, what? So it's just the way you can get there, like you were saying, to various points in time. And yeah, the rookies, I was almost thinking while you're talking, when you said half a season immediately, and I think an historical example to almost hit that on the day, would be Nick Chubb, right? I think it was week 7 or week 8 that right before the deadline is when we saw Carlos Hyde get shipped away. We had seen flashes, but not very many people were even flexing Nick Chubb before that point. And then he gets unleashed, and we know the rest of the story for that season and his career so far. But, we're seeing that, like, even before week 1, we've talked about it before. I mean, Antonio Gibson was going to be somebody that was going to maybe moonlight as a wide receiver offensive weapon because Washington was so loaded at running back. We don't know what they're going to do. They have all these traditional running backs, Darius Geis, Adrian Peterson. I mean, saying it now, it's almost like tongue in cheek. Right. Adrian Peterson was projected to get more running back carries than Antonio Gibson this year for Washington. So all things like that. So Gibson ends up being the week 1 unquestioned starter. Then you have Edwards-Helaire. It's like, wow, this is going to be glorious. It's wide open. And then you get the opt-out from Damian Williams. And then you go, oh, but now you add Le'Veon Bell, and plus you have the Chiefs basically saying, well, pass greater than run, so we're not even going to venture there. And frankly, their defense is not good enough in a lot of times to say that they can just sort of shut her down and run the ball 35 times, right? I mean, then you're lowering the sample size of Patrick Mahomes. If you run it twice and it's 3rd and 4, you have one chance. If you have Patrick Mahomes throw 3 straight passes without an offensive holding penalty, what are the odds they get a first down? Really high. So really, if they run the ball, and this is sort of the dialogue you created weeks ago of just saying, why would they? Like, why would they? It's not like a novelty when they do. So, and these teams, especially teams that can make chunk touchdowns and chunk plays, they're going to have less true goal line cracks because they don't matriculate it down. Okay, now they're inside the 10. Now they're inside the 5. Now they're at the 2. Now the running back gets 2 carries and he scores once. Like, that's the opposite of what the Chiefs do. They gut you like a fish from the 46-yard line with a giant, massive chunk play that maybe gets into the end zone. So yeah. And Cam Akers, I mean, like you were saying, just about value, like Jonathan Taylor the last month, he's running back 3. And it kind of pains me a little bit because you know what? One of the guys we said was going to be a big offseason value might not be a big offseason value because the schedule is so glorious to close the season. David Montgomery the last month is running back 1. And he has another great matchup this week. So he might be a couple round mover from 2-3 weeks ago to January from where you can get him. But just, looking at the names in the top 10, top 12 of who's actually moving the needle right now, not a ton of, guys that were helping you a month or two ago. Between Taylor, Austin Eckler is back and an auto start player. James Robinson certainly wasn't on that map. Mike Davis, this feels like is it James Conner, right? Where it's like every Nope. Okay, must have been on my lineup. There's James Conner, and it feels like Mike Davis is the same way. I mean, I saw him traded in a dynasty league with no deadline for a relatively meaningful rookie Devy pick next year, plus a Devy prospect. And there, talk about helping out a non-contender, trading away Mike Davis, because now the contender is in the final 2-week, all play push. Hey, I might get 2 starts or at least 1 start out of Mike Davis, so I'll give a couple pieces away. But Davis is going to turn into a shadow in January, right? No one's going to trade for him as a free agent, and who knows where he lands and what opportunity he has. Certainly not 2-month-long spot starter. So all these new names, Cam Akers, now you feel pretty comfortable with him. DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins is sort of moving into that zone. I would say he's behind a lot of the other guys, so, and Gibson's been helping you for months. So it's just all those names. And yet I didn't mention Edwards-Helaire, as one of those names. And one that's near and dear to us, A.J. Dillon, is another one where you say, hey, what if situation had rolled his direction as opposed to one of these other guys? And that's how fickle it is. What if Gibson were playing a Lynn Bowden sort of role of anywhere and everywhere on the offense, and what's going to happen, positional eligibility. And then you've got, what if Aaron Jones was an opt-out? Aaron Jones an opt-out and Jamal Williams has a October 7th injury. Where do we sit today? So that's why, and like what you're saying, so if you were, A.J. Dillon is here on the scale. He's a 6 on a nominal whatever. But like in October or November, lowering him to a 3 is nonsensical, right? Because nothing's really occurred. What has occurred that you were not projecting? And I think that's a big situational, and we'll talk about this during, rookie draft season, which is basically 4 months following when fantasy season ends here. But
days from now.
Yeah, days from now. We're waiting. We're drooling at the food dish. but this is the environment of trying to project, and that's why here's the phrase that we'll reiterate in January or April, that when people say, well, I wait to do my rookie evaluations until after the NFL draft. Well, that means you're going to overrate situation, because you're getting a flood of information, because what's going to happen is you're going to let draft position, that matters. I'm not going to discount it, but it's going to factor in landing spot, and you're going to sit there. And because you're going to get all that and you're not really judging, you haven't, evaluated the player, and you're getting all of it at once, you're probably going to circle back. You're going to watch maybe some of the players and evaluate some of the players, but you're not going to really have here's where I had them pre-draft. Now I'm going to tweak, because you don't have a static point. You're going to just do it all at once. And so if someone landed in a good situation, you're going to gravitate towards that. You're going to be like a magnet, and you're going to go right towards it. And that can definitely misguide you. And we were even talking about that with Edwards-Helaire of, runaway 101, let's have some measured analysis about that. And we're kind of seeing that play out, right? Where they add Le'Veon Bell, and let's not think that Le'Veon Bell has been a meaningful part, but I do have this question for you, Jordan. If Edward does the lack of usage of Edwards-Helaire, is it only about it's Patrick Mahomes and any running back could be there and they wouldn't make them a more featured element? If they had somebody else, would this complete passing slant still be applicable?
I think there's other guys that could maximize the situation more. I think Swift would be an example of that. I think Taylor would be an example of that as well. Right. But it's interesting. Like I was just looking at their stats. 8.4 yards per attempt for Patrick Mahomes every time he throws the ball. They rush for 4.5 yards per carry, which is actually not bad. It's pretty good. But every time they decide to throw instead of run, it's almost 3.9 yards on average better, right? Why wouldn't you do that? And it's interesting. We as we were having a discussion in the staff and our staff chat about Pittsburgh, right? And about they're throwing the ball so much, and it's one of those things like, all right, like even so, Ben's throwing for like 6.5 yards per attempt. But anything that they do in terms of the running game isn't going to return that, right? So it might not be particularly attractive, and it might not suit the eye, but it's more effective than running 3.9 yards per carry for
or
whoever
5 or whatever. Yeah.
Right. It's
even if you're going for 6 or 5.8 or whatever, like, a low number, still better.
The worst passing attack is almost always going to be better than the best rushing attack. And
it's hard to go through a half with like 3.5, 4 yards per attempt. I've seen it. I've tracked it in some of the games this year, but it's very few and far between.
Yeah, that's the Denver game there, right? That was certainly certainly happening. But yeah, I mean, and so I think a lot of these situations, I think it's really, I think we do. I think the right way to do it is to, and I've sort of learned this more and more as I've played, which is you just keep using rookies in particular to reload, right? Or to backfill your line.
Fortify.
Yeah. Fortify that's a great word for it. And you just keep taking, and if you keep doing this, it adds up, and it'll over time, you'll sort of see the effect of it. But Jonathan Taylor is a good example of this. Like, I have some spots where I didn't particularly need running back, but you take Jonathan Taylor, and then he's like my running back 4 or 5. And, there's been injuries, right? A couple of those teams had Barkley on them, right? I mean, now he's sort of thrust into a role, but you sort of keep doing that. And when you do that, you can have patience, right? So next year it's the same thing. And you just, you keep collecting pedigree at running back, and it adds up over time. And what you'll sort of see is those things will have a sort of an arc to them, which, as you're sort of losing guys, or guys are fading out or whatnot, you're getting that backfill in. And if you do that over and over again, what'll happen is you'll care less and less about rookie situation, because you'll have less and less, it'll be less and less of a need, because you'll sort of be constantly building a depth, right? That you're more backfilling than anything. So that's one thing that I would really say about situation. And I think situation, I think that more and more we see this, it's so much of it is volume, right? And so much of it is just
perfect storm.
Yeah, it's how much opportunity you get, right? And a lot of the running backs don't matter stuff. It's I believe in a lot of that. And when you sort of look at it, it's how many opportunities did you get really is what your score is, right? Is what is a great predictor of it. And so when
well, let's break this down. Like, so since running back is our go-to position here. So some situational factors that I was thinking while you mentioned that. First thing that I notice watching games every week is there's not a lot of offenses, or there's a pretty big divide where when I see teams get down inside the 5-yard line, there's 3 subsets. There's this subset that will give a running back multiple carries inside of that zone. First and goal at the 3-yard line. That out of the three downs, or maybe even the first 2, they will give running back carries. I know the Raiders are with Josh Jacobs, and there's a few others. But there's also a subset where in a 3-down sequence, you might get one. It's up in the air. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And then there's others where you're almost surprised that when a running back gets a point-blank look in an offense. So that's 3 different and massively different upside scenarios for what your upside is. That can change on the same team. That can change for the same player. So, but there can be different subsets there on what bucket you're in. The other bucket would be, does the depth chart have a go-to hurry-up back or a go-to receiving guy? I'm almost thinking of, the Theo Riddick in previous iterations, the Darren Sproles, the Austin Eckler, the Danny Woodhead, James White. If there's someone like that, we mentioned Tariq Cohen was doing that for multiple seasons. Heck, might have been doing it this year for David Montgomery. That if you have a back like that on your depth chart, that's a problem. That's a problem, because you are not going to sit there, and if it's your drive, some of these teams do this very firm starter 2 drives, backup 1 drive, and you rotate around. Well, if the starter drive is on the 2-minute drive, you just got screwed out of touches and potentially 2 or 3 catches, because now it's the hurry up back. Now it's Jalen Richard. Now it's James White. And so that is a massive downturn in passing game involvement, as well as now we have the other one with the goal line.
Yeah, for sure. And like that Harris example is a really good one in terms of, what do you do with that? Right. And I think he's going to be a classic example of he actually is outshone, right. His almost in a Devin Singletary type of way. He's better
than the box score.
Right. He's better than the box score. Right? He's better than the fantasy impact. So sort of how do you treat that? I think those two are interesting ones, and they're talent buys probably, but are they, fantasy?
Well, yeah, I was gonna express J.K. Dobbins. So is J.K. Dobbins one that? So you've got Mark Ingram, probably moving on in the offseason, and is Edwards? I don't think Edwards is a free agent offhand. Restricted or something. I think
he's restricted.
Yeah. So, but they're not getting receiving work in that offense. You've got Lamar Jackson, who's going to steal quite a bit. Just running around, chunk touchdowns. We saw that this past Monday to close week 14. So is it a strong running game? Yes. But if you're capped to, the goal line is going to be, helter skelter. You've got a quarterback that's going to run for his own. It's almost like being attached to Cam Newton. I mean, it could increase efficiency with your touches, but you could still get squeezed because if the quarterback's running for 5, 8, whatever touchdowns, that's coming largely off of running backs, at least a good cross section of that. So J.K. Dobbins is one where if you just watch him, if you just watch touch, and sync it up every week, you're like, wow, he's a really good running back. No questions there. But situationally, it's a murky one in terms of, is he going to catch 40, 50 passes? Is he going to run for 12 plus touchdowns? Gus Edwards looks pretty good. That guy has certainly outkicked his coverage and outproduced his draft position from he's elbowing his way into touches and meaningful snaps now for years, and he's not going away next year, all likelihood. So and they're a team that probably needs to load up. They loaded up this year with J.K. Dobbins, being they didn't technically need J.K. Dobbins, but they need to have a bunch of running backs, sort of like San Francisco. This is what we do. This is our MO. But I almost wonder with Dobbins, is he going to have a lower ceiling, at least for the next year or two, potential under the current, because of that squeeze potentially passing game and attachment to the mobile quarterback that does hurt you, a la Damian Harris this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I sort of thought about this from a receiving game perspective with him. Right, what's the ceiling ultimately look like? And I thought he looked good. Right, and we watched that game on Monday night was endlessly entertaining for a lot of reasons. But I think he looks good. And the question is and maybe this could dovetail into a Lamar Jackson debate because I just did my quarterback rankings again, and I was surprised at what I did. I didn't expect to do it.
QB1, you moved it back up.
No, I got into it was interesting. I'd be interested in your take on it, but yeah, with Dobbins, what's the ceiling look like, right? And is it 40 targets? I mean, he's got 22 on the year. They have 43 as a running back core. I'm not sure that that's what really they're gonna do, and if that's not going to be what they do, and they're going to be running some zone read stuff down at the goal line, right? That seems like a capped upside situation waiting to happen. Is it a big time running back volume situation? Yes, but I think if you're sort of looking at one that could be a capped upside situation, I think it could be that. Whereas I think the other guys in this class, so the other day 2 guys right now that are playing, excluding Dillon for a second, with Taylor, Swift, and Akers, I think you with all of them have probably higher receiving upside than Dobbins does. So I think it's an interesting of how you would sort of go about, how you go about treating that. And if that's a situation where, in the offseason, if there's an uptick in value, if you sort of want to transition to, that's moving Dobbins plus for Swift or something like that, or sort of transitioning off of Dobbins for
Akers plus, or
Akers or Gibson plus, or however the market ends up going, like how you do that. I think he'd be an interesting pivot point in terms of maybe some unexpected stuff from his profile that I'm not sure I love going forward.
Yeah. I was thinking back, and I think we addressed this once, but I know we're on different sides of this, so this could be just one you nod and you go, Chad, you're a dope, and I would have talked you out of it if you
Philadelphia quarterback situation.
No, thankfully we're not going to be discussing that. No, I was thinking back to what would I go back in late April, early May and tell myself, and it's instructive for the future, and we'll see how this pans out. So I definitely grading it based on 13, 14 games is an incomplete profile, as we know, for any incoming rookie. We've already seen, Lynn Bowden got traded, for goodness sakes, and they bailed like very early, and yet he's showing things at Miami. So the story is not written, and Mike Davis would be a classic example of, a fourth round rookie, and he comes back years later, and all of a sudden now he has his claim run, of massive production and value in situations. So, but one guy that I know I was more on than you, and just to talk through this as, a preview to learn and to not have it happen in the future to some degree, is Anthony Mcfarland. I was thinking back to the late second or early third round of rookie drafts for start one quarterback specifically, because I know that was that range. Like after Gibson and Brian Edwards, and there's somebody else in that range, but then it was like, it's sort of, I'm not going to say a wasteland, but it was there's a noticeable stop or tier point of is sort of the rest. So you may have two or three favorites, and everyone is probably going to have different ones. Then somebody might make it to the fourth round, that you like next. But Anthony Mcfarland was one that I liked the profile, and I liked what I saw at Maryland. I haven't seen it. He's one of the few rookies where there's been a massive disconnect between what I saw in college and it not translating or not coming to fruition at all at the NFL level. Part of me wants to say, you know what? Nothing's really working with the Steelers run game and the running backfield. So to say that, this might just be a system failure. Connor doesn't look good. They have 4 running backs they're rotating, and they're just kind of trying to rub sticks together, and now they've just given up. For an undefeated team, they were giving up. So that could be part of it. But also part of it was, later second round, you're kind of defaulting, and you're taking a day 3 running back, and one that doesn't have like right away situational promise, right? I mean, he was pretty much right there, same early day 3, and there's some positives there profile as Benny Snell, but he's not prototypical like Benny Snell. And then you have James Conner there. Is he going to be there after this year? Who knows? But he was there then. So you have multiple speed bumps that you kind of want more opportunistic situational upside with a late second or third, fourth, fifth round rookie picks, unless it's a deep league. Unless it's a deep league where you can just stash everybody and, there's no roster value pretty much in terms of holding that roster retention time, that time value. But, thinking back to that and a number of other profiles that just had a lot more either pedigree where you say, well, even if they do nothing, I'm still going to be holding for sure through next year's rookie draft in my leagues at 302 or whatever. You have easy, like Adam Troutman, for example, or you had round 1 quarterbacks still that they're going to start at some point, even if it's a start 1, like you're at least, it wasn't Burrow, it was pretty much everybody else could be available at that point in the draft. So just thinking through all of those angles of don't get so pot committed to running back. And I mixed in other positions for sure, but Mcfarland was one of those picks where I was like, even if I only ended up with 5 or 6 shares across my leagues, that was still enough to go, you know what? It was less of you got to go for that guy type zone of the draft, and one where you could have mixed it. You could have probably just, let me trade for a future second. Let me trade 211 for a future second. It's going to be higher. Reset the clock, clear the draft spot. You certainly can't, trade him for that now. And now you're kind of, cost invested where you're like, I want to see how this goes. This was a dumpster fire year, and let's see what happens if Connor isn't back. Could he be the running back 2, or who knows what they do? But anyway, that's one just talking through here that I think I've definitely learned from. Whether or not Mcfarland works out, I think there was definitely a way to optimize that zone of the draft and what I was typically doing.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's a good I think the biggest takeaway from that is you sort of talk through your process on that. I think the biggest takeaway from that is you sort of understand what you did and learn from it. I don't necessarily think that your process was wrong. I think it broke away from you. I think a lot of the market thought that he was a potential 2021 starter, right? And there were aspects of his profile. So it's interesting when you sort of talk through it. I see what the logic was, and it was probably like a 33% bet that you came up on the most likely end of it, right? That's ultimately what it is. But I do think it's interesting, and something that I've done more and more is to whether it's draft picks or whether it's I do some writing with rookie drafts, so I have my thoughts down. But even if you're not writing, if you're not producing an article or something about it, I do think writing down and whether it's trades, we've talked about this, but trades or startup draft thoughts that you had, like in your draft, your rookie draft strategies, right? Writing them down, and it doesn't have to be anything super detailed, but just so that you can go back and evaluate them. Because what you just did, Chad, is a good example of sort of talking through, hey, if I knew what I knew now, how would I change what I did back then? I think that's an instructive example, because I don't think it's per se like the wrong decision. I think the most likely thing happened, which was that Mcfarland wasn't the guy. But I think anyone that you're looking at that point, unless it was maybe like Cole Clement that you passed on, I think that was probably like the most likely outcome was that person was going to miss, right? So it is an interesting, and I think, and you got, and the good part about that is you take it's a clear situation, right? Like now it's not like you're sitting on, a Jeff Janis type with that pick, but.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But yeah, that wasn't a zone where you could have taken Tua, for example. Like he's going to start, and you'll be able to find out, what you think in a start one about a quarterback. And I always think back to those shares where, we talked about Justin Herbert being a Josh Allen type, where, there's been a couple leagues where I took him in the third round, and I've been starting him most of the year. And that's the kind of, magic in a bottle you can get, but you're going to get the opportunity to see that with early picks. And that's why draft capital by the NFL matters, is because they're likely to get more opportunities earlier. Like Laviska Shenault, for example, he was firmly in the second round, and you're going to get opportunities, based on that, unless the depth chart goes sideways or you just are not on the NFL spectrum and level there. Chase Claypool was another one, going in that range where you could definitely talk yourself out of it and say it's a loaded depth chart. But you could also say the Steelers do a great job with wide receiver picks over and over again. And you can just kind of we've talked about that before, right? That Chase Claypool is a rare player or rare prospect. And gravitating towards rare could have rare outcomes. We'll see how it goes. I actually looked up Chase Claypool in the last month as like wide receiver 50 or something. So that spurt, where he was dominant and people were saying he was the 72-hour wide receiver one in Dynasty. That fizzled back like a 4th of July, misfit rocket. But yeah, but the point is you have something tangible that people aren't going to forget, that he has the potential to be a beasting monster, over people with highlight moments. And we'll see without Juju Smith-Schuster likely next offseason, moving on, that all of a sudden that's a depth chart that gets cleaned up by one player. It goes from 4 to 3. And that's appealing, for a team that is constructed how they are. So for other rookies, I was just interested to see that the rookie wide receivers, they've all had moments. T. Higgins is wide receiver 48 over the past month. CeeDee Lamb right there in the same zone. These were guys that were auto starts earlier in the season, and Dallas is its own story about look at before and after Dak Prescott, and other things have gone wrong this year. But Chase Claypool is another one. We saw those moments. Michael Pittman has had moments. I think it's very interesting because what you want from these rookie receivers, you don't get Brandon Ayuk, who's a firm wide receiver one. Good luck keeping him out of your lineups now going forward. Justin Jefferson, same sort of thing. But everybody else, a lot of them, you've seen enough. All you want is moments, right? Like one threshold for me is about wide receiver 80 or so. And what does that mean? It means you're contributing for your depth chart. It means you're wide receiver 2 or 3, maybe cameoing from 4 to 3, oscillating there, rising or with an injury or whatever. Gabriel Davis would be a good example of that, of someone he's shown enough. Has he been a starter for you in your lineup at all this year? Maybe, maybe not, depending on depth of league, injuries, bye weeks, whatever. But the point is, you've seen something to say there's something here. And I think with wide receiver, it really is that low of a threshold in the first year that I just want to see something. If he's not playing and he's not hurt and it's not a dynamic depth chart that is like that would keep almost anybody down, then, what's the reason here? If he's playing plenty of snaps and not getting targets and not getting any production, like, you got to see something. So at least, Colin Johnson, for example, you've seen something out of him. Like, he's actually made a few plays. I mentioned a bunch of other guys. KJ Hamler, right? He's made a few plays. Yeah. We can question the depth chart or the situation or tons of stuff, but at least for wide receiver, I really think it is Donovan Peoples-Jones. It really is that basic of a threshold of I want to see something. And we've had a lot of those guys. It just shows what a deep draft it is, and it's deep next year. And it's just, we're really turning over and getting a lot of youth at the position. And I've just been, my one big takeaway from 2021 wide receivers is overall optimism for filling a lot of NFL depth charts.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of it. And what I would say generally too is you go back and look, and there's not a ton of correlation between the order in which these guys were going, especially when you look at them in tiers, right? So you look at and I would just consider the top 4 guys from a breakout and pedigree perspective sort of fit in a group, which was Jefferson, Lamb, Jeudy, and Reagor. And when you sort of look at the position in which they were going, there's very little relationship between that and where they are now. And so one of the things that I've really learned from this is that that when you get profiles, and I'm going to be much more committed to this going forward, when you get profiles that are the same, it's an arbitrage opportunity that you need to hit. Right. So you don't take Jeudy at 108. You take
or Lamb at 4.
Or Lamb at 4, right? You take Jefferson plus whatever asset sort of makes up that gap.
Or Ayuk at 202,
Ayuk would have been a different tier for me because of breakout age, but it's a similar type of thing. So I would have gone with, the arbitrage there was to get to Jefferson plus, right? And when you sort of look at it, like, even though we like those guys, right, you might say like between 55 and 65% hit rate, right? So it's not a guarantee. And so you're taking a very, very similar bet plus something and getting it. I did that Jeudy and what turned out to be Jeudy for Jefferson in a second, right? And it was, I think it was actually in the league that you and I are in against each other, which is one of the only ones I think we are, that's the case. And so I just took the extra pick, collect the pick, and now I have the better player. And I think sort of treating those situations as more of random, I think is something that I'm absolutely going to do more of. And I think that there's more juice to collect out of that stone, if you will.
Yeah, the one thing about that I recall, because I was thinking of also, the quote unquote big 5 running backs that, we had said, who's going 5? Sometimes it was Swift, sometimes it was Akers, sometimes it was Dobbins, but it was one of those 3 guys. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, we may get 12 to 24 months down the road and they're running back 1 or 2 or, probably not 5. The point is they're probably not 5, probability wise. And you were getting juice on that. Now, the problem was someone paying? You have to have someone that is willing to move up and actually give you something that's tangible for you to say, now I can arbitrage. Now I actually can move down, whether it's a startup draft or a rookie draft environment. So that is one thing that actually requires a trading partner. It requires someone on the other end willing to say, I want to be at the front of the line. And so if you don't have that, then it becomes problematic. So that would be the one thing. So if you were sitting there at 7 and no one's willing to pay from 11 or 12 so that you can execute that move, then you have a barrier. And now I'm not going to say stuck, but now you have the freedom to have more players available at your spot, and you have to take your favorite. And now your next pick isn't until 207 or whatever. So or you're trying to trade up from 207, which again is sort of the other non-optimal method, because now you're giving up to move up as opposed to move down to do the arbitrage as opposed to getting inside the tier line. But these are some secondary things. I do want to mention that this is the Football Guys Dynasty Show, episode 33 with Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara. We're a third of the way to 100, Jordan. Scary thoughts. We're triple digit bound. We've got growing momentum here.
That's a notable accomplishment.
Exactly. Lights are still on officially. Let's check the switch. Lights on. And again, subscribe if you're enjoying this. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on all the podcasting platforms through the Audible. There, sign up for the Football Guys daily email update delivered by Joe Bryant. Your daily guide to all your news and instant analysis over there at footballguys.com/free. And actually had a couple trades here for us, Jordan, as we finish up. So this is right in there with the profiles and younger wide receivers here. So you've got a rebuilding team trading with a contending team. That's always ripe for making a trade that can make sense for both. Straight up, we've got CeeDee Lamb for Kelvin Ridley. What are your thoughts there?
I think this is going to. Yeah, I think this is going to be a fascinating. Debate amongst profiles, because I think there's really 3 different types of profiles that you can do at the top of a rookie board, or excuse me, a startup board. You can go young, you can go middle, right? So the young guys are the Jeffersons. I would consider like Metcalf, AJ Brown, right? Those sort of first, second year guys. Lamb fits in that. Second tier would be sort of the middle career guys. So DJ Moore, Kelvin Ridley, Diggs, right? Sort of Amari Cooper, right? Sort of that range of age. And then you could go older. So you could go Thomas, Hopkins, Adams, right? Sort of that sphere.
25 to 27 would maybe be middle. And then 21 to 24 is young. 28 plus would be older.
Yeah. And so you sort of look at, I think that's going to be a really, really interesting debate. And there's I think arguments for and against each group, right? So I would say in this, I think Kelvin Ridley's probably undervalued. Would sort of be my thought in the market. So I would take Kelvin Ridley. One thing with that I have learned, and this is a lesson that I've learned playing a lot of Dynasty and looking at a lot of the numbers, is I think when you're going to go early at wide receiver, it's kind of like looking for a spouse. You don't want to propose on the first date. You
don't go super young. Like the people that get married at 16, it generally doesn't work out with the highest probability numbers as someone who gets married at 40. Is that what you're saying?
You want to learn something about them, right? Like you want to meet their family. You want to.
You mean you don't want to know their favorite band is Oasis and they like friendship bracelets, and I guess they like going to Burger King like me?
Yeah. You need to know that, right? Yeah. So it's not hey, let's I'm not getting engaged to someone at first sight. It's let's have a little bit of a courtship here. And
so one good year is not enough, you mean, to as someone famous once said, put a ring on it?
And I'm not even sure, like some of these guys, like Higgins, like I know people want to vault Higgins way up here, but like
be careful.
Danger Will Robinson, right? Like well,
it's about price, right? So this is not saying you can like him, but like you just said, if there's an arbitrage wide receiver that basically did positive things as a rookie, same age, and yet they're going 3 rounds later, why don't you take that guy, pass on Higgins, maybe draft somebody else, and now you've got somebody in that middle bucket or older bucket, and now you've got some security, and now you drafted, whether it's Ayuk or some of these other guys that you like that are cheaper. They're probably, or who knows how it'll pan out with Higgins's slide and the Bengals slide to close the season. I mean, all bets are off on how this is going to stack up there. But yeah, so I think Lamb, let's not forget. I mean, you've got Gallup there, he's good. You got Cooper there, he's good. So even if Dak is back, there's sort of a ceiling there, situationally, target wise.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even mention Blake Jarvin coming back. Tongue in cheek. But the point is, I mean, even with super volume, Lamb was early in the season, like a lower wide receiver 2? Is that right? I mean, what if Julio's best days are behind him? I mean, he's been in and out. I mean, Ridley, even being the quote unquote number 2, has already been a top 20 guy multiple seasons. So I mean,
wide receiver 8 right now.
Auto start guy. I mean, so to me, this is one where it's getting really cutesy. I'm getting younger. Well, it's not like Ridley's old, so you might want to slow that down on the huge tactical advantage you have. All right, and the other one is I can speak to there's one IDP part of this, so I can speak to that. Do you play an IDP, by the way? Do you have any IDP?
I can't do it. And the reason why is if I go that route, I'll never come home. Like I'll just go down a rabbit hole and it'll be.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. You'll watch the game completely different. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
All right. So we have David Montgomery and Chase Young for Robbie Anderson, a 5th, and a 2022 first. So if you just want to consider that, Robbie Anderson and a 2022 first. But with Montgomery in there and Chase Young, I thought this was worthy of including. What are your thoughts?
How do you value? I can't even begin to analyze it because I don't know how valuable Chase Young is. So I'll just turn it over to you. I mean, I would say
I'll say that.
Montgomery's worth that pick.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, I was going to say I was just going to address the 22 first for David Montgomery part because we've talked about Montgomery being insulated. The fact that he's running back 1 right now, and if you're getting him for the playoff push, you're getting an auto start guy. The schedule is good, and contract wise, you wouldn't expect him to get overtly replaced. You just would not. And so that is easily worth a pick. And I love picks. That's easily worth 2 years from now on the prospect that you get someone better because the time lost of this season and next season, is valuable. But Chase Young, again, he is one that I drafted relatively highly in one of my IDP leagues. And it's all scoring. IDP is all about scoring. I would say this, it's like if running backs were 20 yards per rushing yard compared to 10 yards and point per carry. Like that's the massive changes you have to IDP depending on scoring. So it really depends, but I would say this Chase Young is one that he's an auto start player and one like a JJ Watt previously could be on that track of being an absolute game changer for your team. So to me, that is worth far beyond, that's worth Robbie Anderson, the 5th round pick, and probably half of the 1st round pick at least. So, and maybe more. So to me, this is one where you're just, I don't care if you're rebuilding or David Montgomery isn't important to you or whatever. This is one where, again, this is how you would trade picks away if you are going to trade them away, getting a cornerstone guy and you're getting David Montgomery, who for this year and next year probably is one. So and then you can see after that in a James Conner like way, maybe he ends up, not being valued by the NFL after his rookie deal or something. That's perfectly possible, but he's insulated for now and should be because he's played well enough. So that was the big highlight point I wanted to make of that deal.
Yeah. I have two. I'll bring 2 trade questions, 2 straight up trade questions. Ready? Super flex. We'll just go super flex. Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, straight up.
Well, let me check the Football Guys rankings. Up. They were just updated today, it says. And the answer is ding, 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 Josh Allen.
It's taken me a while to get to this point because, again, you're
a little too close to home here. You are very close to the situation.
It hurts, and there's there's a lot of scar tissue in there on the Bills thing, but the stats back this up, and I think they're players going in 2 wildly different directions.
One of them is transitioning to going from a Cam Newton-like runner to throwing the ball a ton. And he's sort of the middle ground between Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert, who we thought would run, and now he just doesn't run at all. Yeah. So, but yeah, he's running enough for it to be valuable, but he's turning into a big time passer. And that's again, it's happening earlier than you typically see, but that's what you want. We're with Lamar Jackson. I don't think we're going to get there. I just don't think we're going to get to the transition point of, oh, look at him. Like, remember when he used to run all the time? Oh, and now he's this, he can just drop that back on third down. And no, that's what defenses want him to do. And I think 2 years from now, they're going to still, they're rooting for him to drop back and take a hitch and then throw the ball. They're going to be like, oh, that's a big win for us. So and I don't think people realize how insignificant a season notwithstanding the big game and the monumental game he had coming back in and throwing that pass that took Chad out of a couple playoffs to Marquise Brown. But I mean, not that withstanding, I mean, this has not been a good year for him. With the massive expectations, like if you took him at 101, 102, 103 of a startup draft, Superflex, to me, you can't feel good about that 11 months, 5 months, whatever it was later. Like, to me, that is you're rubbing it all over your face with your first round pick, right? I mean, that's sort of the danger about going towards risky profiles at quarterback, especially in a Superflex draft early. That's sort of the risk factor, because you're also chasing the big year, right? Like Lamar Jackson, if he didn't finish in the top 4 or 5, like that's just, that is a year one. I wish I could redo that. And it's sort of the value lost that you'll never get back with your most important asset when you join a league is that first pick. So with Lamar Jackson, I just think, I mean, what did he throw? Like 12 passes, 13, 14 passes. And they put up 40 something points. You can say that's great, but this is not the era we're in the NFL. Where do you sit on that? I mean, is Josh Allen been like your favorite developmental watch of any player for like a 2-year span in your memory?
Yeah, that I can remember. I mean, I didn't have this in the range of outcomes.
Right.
And I have a pretty wide range of outcomes for players. Like, I'll include a lot of outcomes that I think people think are unreasonable. And, when I do these polls and stuff that says, how many people have the possibility to finish as wide receiver 1? And I'm always the person that answers the biggest amount in the, in the biggest category. I didn't see this. But I think when you sort of look at the profiles, I think going forward, it's tough to make an argument for Lamar Jackson over Josh Allen, would be my thought. The other interesting one that I had was Kyler Murray or Josh Allen. And that is an interesting one from I think they're closer in terms of passers, and we can sort of debate, where they are on the spectrum or what the development arc looks like. And is there regression in there with Josh Allen? I think there's much more overlap potential between those two, whereas I think it's most likely than not that Allen is a better passer than Lamar Jackson, right? I would think that is I don't think Lamar Jackson gets to a point where he's a better passer than Josh Allen. I can see there's a lot of overlap, and we might not know the answer to that debate between Kyler Murray and Josh Allen for a long time. I think that's a reasonable debate there. But it's interesting when you sort of come 6 months, right, from where Josh Allen was and where Lamar Jackson was to where we are now, right? Again, if we talk about situation, how about that one? Right? How about that one in terms of the massive change of those two guys? Like, you would have been laughed at. I was laughed at for suggesting that Dak Prescott, who had finished as quarterback 2 last year, was more valuable than Lamar Jackson. You would be committed if you had said that about Josh Allen, right? I mean, and now here we are, right? And so what was heresy 6 months ago is now
within reason.
Yeah, and I think
debatable.
Debatable might be too kind to Josh.
Well, I'm being
Jackson. But it's interesting, right? I think you sort of look at those, and I think you have to have a reasonable, wide ranges of outcomes on players, and that's a good example of it.
Yeah. I would say, looking at your rankings, I got about 3 questions. So we'll dial those up for next week because I think they're as we get into the off season, they're critical ones about profiles, risk tolerance, but also risk intolerance that I think people need to have, and just see where on the spectrum you sit. Because Superflex drafts, as we say, are more commonplace than ever before. And you're going to be seeing those, if you have only played in Start 1, you're going to be seeing more available drafts that are super flex than Start 1. If you haven't already, this offseason, you're going to start to see that in full order, in my opinion. All right. So in this episode, go ahead.
I changed. I realized I had I looked like a crazy person today. I had a long inner dialogue with myself that may have been animated out loud at one point about Kyler Murray's ranking. So I did put him I had him lower, and that was a mistake. So I have him now up in that tier. So I'll just say that I think that there's.
No, that wasn't one of the questions. That wasn't one of the questions I had.
Okay.
No, not at all. I have other ones for sure. All right. Okay. So in this episode, we talked about rookie running backs, wide receivers, as well as a thought process about profiles. Talked about that through some trading, and of course the macro of being your best dynasty self as a GM, evaluator, and ultimately drafter, because that is the backbone of, as Jordan said, backfilling your team and getting the fortify that castle, filling the cupboard, whatever phrase and moniker you want to put on there for the back end of your team. Because as we mentioned, it's really later year one and more into year two when you really start to reap some of the benefits and rewards from those picks you made all the way back when they were just a gleam in the eye of being an NFL prospect and joining their team as well as ours. So for Jordan McNamara, I am Chad Parsons. Until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.